I'm glad you're here. And I mean that, because if something brought you to this video, there's a good chance you've been feeling something you couldn't quite name. A shift. A darkness. Like the person you once knew has been slowly replaced by something you no longer recognize. Something that no longer even tries to hide what it is. There's a version of a narcissist that most people know about. The charming one. The manipulative one. The one who lies smoothly and makes you question your own memory. That version is dangerous enough. But there is another version, a later version, that operates on a completely different level. And that's what we're here to talk about today. Because something happens to a narcissist when enough time passes. When enough people have seen through them. When enough consequences have piled up and enough supply has run dry. Something in them stops pretending. And what's left underneath that pretending, what finally surfaces when the mask is fully gone, is something that genuinely deserves to be called dark. I'm not speaking metaphorically when I use the word demon. I'm speaking psychologically, behaviorally. There is a specific profile of narcissistic behavior, documented, studied, survived, that mirrors what humans across cultures and centuries have described as demonic. Not supernatural, but deeply, profoundly destructive in a way that feels beyond ordinary human cruelty. And the people who survive it, the ones sitting where you might be sitting right now, they often say the same thing. They say, I kept waiting for them to go back to who they were. I kept thinking this couldn't be the same person. That waiting, that disbelief, that is part of what makes this particular stage of narcissism so dangerous. So today we're going to walk through 5 terrifying signs that a narcissist has crossed into this territory. Not the early stages. Not the love bombing or the subtle gaslighting or the quiet manipulation. The later stage. The one that looks you in the eye with zero warmth and feels nothing about what it sees. That stage. Here is the central question I want you to hold as we go through this. How do you know when you're no longer dealing with a difficult person, and you're dealing with something that has genuinely shed its humanity? Because that distinction matters. It matters for your safety. It matters for your sanity. And it matters for how you respond. I want you to think about the last time you felt genuinely afraid of this person. Not anxious, afraid. The kind of fear that doesn't feel like a reaction to something they said. The kind that settles into your body like a warning system activating. If that's happened to you, I need you to take that seriously. Your instincts were not wrong. What we're about to go through isn't easy material. Some of it will feel uncomfortably familiar. Some of it will make things click that you've been trying not to let click. Because once something clicks, you can't unclick it. But I'd rather you have clarity than comfort right now. Comfort can come later. Right now, you need the truth. So stay with me through all 5 of these. Don't skip ahead. Because each sign builds on the last, and together they paint a complete picture. One that I think, by the end of this video, you will recognize completely. And recognition, even when it's painful, is always the first step toward getting yourself free. Sign 1. They have stopped faking empathy entirely. And I want you to understand how significant that is, because in the early stages, the narcissist at least performs empathy. They mirror it. They say the right things at the right moments. It's hollow, but it's there. When that performance disappears completely, something fundamental has changed in how they're operating. Empathy, even when faked, requires the narcissist to still care about the perception they're creating. It means some part of them still wants to appear human to you. The moment they stop faking it, the moment they can sit across from your pain and look genuinely bored, or worse, amused, that tells you they've stopped needing your positive perception altogether. And that is a threshold you should not ignore. What replaces the performance of empathy is something researchers call affective coldness. But in plain human language, it's this. They look at your suffering and feel nothing. Not suppressed feeling. Not hidden guilt. Nothing. And you can feel that nothing. It radiates. It's the reason people describe interactions with a fully decompensated narcissist as feeling inhuman. Because something that should be there isn't. Sign 2. Their cruelty has become deliberate and surgical. Early narcissistic cruelty is often reactive, driven by wounded ego, by fear of exposure, by the need to regain control quickly. It's ugly, but it has a kind of frantic energy to it. What comes later is different. The cruelty becomes calm, measured, aimed with precision at exactly what will hurt most. This is the sign that disturbs survivors the most when they finally name it. Because reactive cruelty you can almost rationalize. They were threatened, they panicked, they lashed out. But deliberate, calm cruelty, cruelty that pauses and selects the right wound to press and then presses it slowly, that cannot be rationalized away. That requires intent. And intent requires a choice. Think about a moment when they said something to you that was so perfectly aimed at your deepest fear or your most private pain that it couldn't have been accidental. That moment where you thought, how did they know exactly where to hit? They knew because they paid attention. Not out of love. Out of preparation. They were building an arsenal from your vulnerabilities. And now they're using it. Sign 3. They have developed a complete alternate reality, and they live in it fully. Every narcissist distorts reality to some degree. But there's a point where the distortion stops being a tool and starts being a residence. Where they are no longer occasionally lying to manipulate outcomes, they are permanently inhabiting a version of events that has no relationship to what actually happened. And here is what makes this sign so destabilizing for the people around them. When someone occasionally lies, you can track the gaps between the lie and the truth. But when someone has fully constructed and moved into an alternate reality, there are no gaps anymore, at least not to them. Their conviction is absolute. Their version of history is the only one that exists in their world. And that conviction is deeply, deeply unsettling to be near. You'll notice it in the way they tell stories about the past. About you. About what happened between you. The version they tell is not just distorted, it's inverted. You are the villain. You are the one who caused the damage. You are the unstable, ungrateful, destructive force in the narrative they've constructed. And they tell it with the complete, unwavering certainty of someone who genuinely believes it. Because at this stage they do. Sign 4. They have begun to enjoy the suffering they cause. This is the sign that crosses into what most people would instinctively describe as evil. Not cruelty performed out of self-protection. Not manipulation designed to achieve a goal. Enjoyment. Pleasure. The quiet satisfaction of watching someone in pain and feeling something that functions, internally, like gratification. That is not a personality flaw. That is a fundamental absence of moral architecture. Let me tell you what this looks like in real life, because it doesn't always look the way you'd expect. It's rarely theatrical. It's rarely a villainous monologue or an obvious display of malice. It's more often a small smile at the wrong moment. A particular quality of stillness when they should be concerned. An absence of the reaction that any normal person would have. That gap, that absence, is where the darkness lives. Survivors describe moments of looking at this person during what should have been an emotionally significant exchange. A moment of real pain, a moment of real fear, and seeing something behind their eyes that stopped them cold. Not emptiness. Something more active than emptiness. Something that looked, for just a second, like satisfaction. And they knew in that moment that whatever this was, it wasn't who they thought they knew. Sign 5. They have become completely immune to consequences. And this is perhaps the most terrifying sign of all, because consequences are what regulate behavior in functional human beings. The fear of loss, the discomfort of shame, the instinct toward self-preservation, these are the internal governors that keep most people from going too far. When those governors go offline, there is no natural limit to what the behavior can become. You'll see this sign in the way they respond, or don't respond, when something that should matter stops mattering. When they lose a relationship and feel nothing. When they face a professional consequence and simply reconstruct their narrative and move on. When they are confronted with documented proof of their behavior and look at it with the bored impatience of someone being shown something entirely irrelevant to them. Here is the psychological truth underneath this sign. Consequences only work on people who have something they're afraid to lose. And a narcissist who has crossed into this territory has, somewhere along the way, stopped being afraid of losing anything, because they have stopped genuinely valuing anything. Not relationships. Not reputation. Not their own stability. Nothing holds enough weight to serve as a limit. And this is where the power dynamic undergoes a fundamental shift, because you have been operating under the assumption that there is still something to appeal to. Some remaining humanity. Some last thread of the person you once knew. Some version of them that, if you could just find the right words, would respond the way a human being responds. And I need you to hear this clearly. At this stage, that thread is gone. The shift that occurs in the people around this kind of narcissist is its own kind of devastation. Because you don't just grieve the relationship, you grieve the entire framework you used to understand it. You thought you were dealing with a difficult person. You now realize you have been dealing with something that operates outside the normal parameters of human relational behavior. That realization changes everything. And here is what the narcissist does when they sense that realization dawning in you. They don't panic. They don't suddenly soften in an attempt to pull you back. They watch. With that particular quality of stillness. And something in their expression tells you they've been waiting for this moment, not with dread, but with a cold, quiet curiosity about what you'll do next. Because to them, your dawning awareness is just the next chapter of a dynamic they are still, in their mind, fully in control of. They have seen people reach this point before. They have watched people come to this exact realization and then, through exhaustion or fear or misplaced hope, walk it back. They are waiting to see if you'll walk it back too. That is the trap. And it is set precisely at the moment of your greatest clarity. This is the turning point. Because 5 signs have now been laid in front of you, and something in you has been quietly measuring them against your own experience this entire time. And if this material has felt less like new information and more like finally having language for something you've already lived, then what comes next is the part that matters most. Let's talk about what it does to a person, to you, to live inside the orbit of a narcissist who has reached this stage. Because the damage is specific. It's not just the general pain of a bad relationship or even the documented harm of narcissistic abuse in its earlier forms. This particular stage produces a particular kind of wound. And it deserves to be named accurately. The first thing that happens is a deep fracture in your sense of reality. Not because you're unstable, but because you have been living alongside someone who has constructed a completely alternate reality and applied continuous pressure on yours. When 2 realities are in sustained conflict, and only one person in that dynamic is willing to doubt themselves, the doubting person's reality eventually starts to buckle. You start questioning memories you were certain of. You start wondering if your emotional responses are proportionate. You start editing your own experience in real time, minimizing, reframing, softening, because the alternative is a confrontation with the full truth of what you're in. And the full truth is too large to hold all at once. So you hold it in pieces and call it coping. The second consequence is a specific kind of exhaustion that rest cannot fix. It's not tiredness from activity, it's tiredness from sustained hypervigilance. From living in a state of constant low-level threat assessment. From scanning every room, every silence, every sentence for danger. Your nervous system has been running emergency protocols for so long that it has forgotten what baseline feels like. People who have been through this stage of narcissistic abuse describe feeling like they aged inside the relationship. Not metaphorically, they mean it physically. The chronic stress, the disrupted sleep, the sustained cortisol elevation, it accumulates. It lands in the body. And when they finally leave, they often say the most disorienting thing is discovering how tired they actually are. Because while they were in it, they couldn't afford to feel it. The third consequence is what I call the loyalty trap, and it's one of the cruelest aspects of this particular stage. Because even when you can see all 5 signs clearly, even when you have named what you're dealing with, there is often a part of you that still feels responsible for this person. Still feels like leaving is a betrayal. Still feels like if you could just find the right approach, something might shift. That loyalty is not weakness. I want to be clear about that. It is the natural human response to a relationship that was once, or appeared to be, meaningful. Your capacity for loyalty is not the problem. The problem is that it is being held hostage by someone who identified it as your most exploitable quality and has been leveraging it ever since. Your loyalty was real. What it was given to was not. The fourth consequence is social isolation, And at this stage of narcissism, the isolation is often so complete that the person inside it can no longer clearly see its edges. Friends have been slowly discredited. Family has been distanced. The professional and social world has been subtly reshaped until the narcissist is the primary, sometimes only, significant relationship remaining. That is not an accident. That is architecture. And in that isolation, the narcissist's reality becomes the dominant reality by default. There's no outside perspective left to offer contrast. No one close enough to say, that's not normal. What you're describing isn't okay. The empath, or anyone caught in this dynamic, is left measuring their experience against a standard set entirely by the person causing the damage. That is one of the most insidious forms of control that exists. But here is what I need you to hold, and hold tightly because it matters. Damage is not destiny. The fracture in your reality can be repaired. The exhaustion in your body can be healed. The isolation can be reversed. The loyalty can be redirected toward yourself, toward people who actually deserve it. None of what has been done to you is permanent, but staying is. And that's the truth that needs to land right now. So let's talk about what comes after. Not in a rushed way, not with a tidy list of steps that makes healing sound like a weekend project. But honestly, because you have been living in something heavy, and the path out of something heavy is never quick or clean. And that's what matters. It exists. And you can walk it. The first thing that has to happen, before the healing, before the rebuilding, before any of the work, is permission. Permission to call what happened to you by its accurate name. Not a difficult relationship. Not we just weren't compatible. Not I should have seen it coming. What happened to you was psychological damage inflicted by someone who had, at some point, stopped operating within the boundaries of humane behavior. You are allowed to say that. Because here's what happens when we don't name things accurately: we heal from the wrong wound. We work on our communication skills when we should be working on our trauma response. We examine our attachment style when we should be examining why we stayed in the presence of something dangerous and kept calling it love. Naming it correctly is not dramatic. It's clinical. It's necessary. It's where healing actually begins. The second thing is rebuilding your relationship with your own perception. Because one of the most lasting effects of this stage of narcissistic abuse is that you stopped trusting what you saw, what you felt, what you knew. Your instincts were continuously overridden by their version of reality, by your own need to believe something different, until the instincts went quiet. And quiet instincts are not gone instincts. They're waiting. Every time something felt wrong and you overrode that feeling, every time your body sent a signal and your mind talked you out of it, you were not being foolish. You were doing what humans do when they're caught between what they feel and what they want to be true. But those feelings were information. Real, accurate, important information. And learning to trust them again is one of the most important things you will ever do for yourself. What I want you to understand about the 5 signs we walked through today is this. They are not just a portrait of the narcissist. They are a map. They tell you exactly what you were navigating. Exactly how sophisticated the terrain was. Exactly why leaving, physically, emotionally, or both, was as difficult as it was. This was not a simple situation. You were not in over your head because you were naive. You were in over your head because the water was deep. And the fact that you are here, watching this, listening, letting this material land, that tells me something about you. It tells me you haven't given up on understanding what happened. You haven't retreated into numbness or bitterness. Some part of you is still reaching toward clarity, toward truth, toward whatever comes after. That reaching is not small. That is the exact opposite of what the narcissist wanted for you. Because what they wanted, what every stage of the abuse was designed to produce, was a version of you that had stopped reaching. A version that had accepted their reality as the only reality. A version that had traded their own internal world for the task of managing someone else's. The fact that you still have questions, still have fire, still have the need to understand, that means they didn't finish the job. And they never will. You are going to rebuild. Not back to who you were before. That person didn't have the knowledge you have now. You're going to rebuild into someone who understands how this works, who can recognize these signs at a distance, who knows the difference between love and leverage, between intimacy and exploitation. That knowledge is yours permanently. No one can take it from you now. And when someone asks you how you survived it, how you came out the other side of something that dark, I hope you tell them the truth. That you got tired of doubting yourself. That you found language for what you'd been living. That you decided one quiet day that your life was worth more than the explanation you kept trying to find for someone else's cruelty. You didn't survive this because you were lucky. You survived it because something in you refused to disappear. Hold on to that. It's the most important thing you own.